This is Duke University.
Achieving sustainable social change, they've got to be very savvy about how they operate in that context and how they align other forces in that context to achieve the kind of change they want to achieve. Rarely can an individual social entrepreneur, no matter how good they are, achieve the kind of widespread social change that they intend. So you think about Jordan talking earlier about the number of people who need eyeglasses. It's not going to be Vision Spring alone who solves that problem. In the end, it's going to have to be Vision Spring Plus. There are going to be other parties that have to pay attention to this, that have to get into this market. They're going to have to provide them. If we have to wait for Vision Spring, no matter how rapidly you grow, if we have to wait for Vision Spring to grow to serve this need, it's going to be a very long time before it gets served. Vision Spring can serve as a demonstration model, can attract some others into the market, can show what's going on. There's got to be something else here that happens if we're going to tackle these problems in a timely fashion and in a sustainable way. So for social entrepreneurs to achieve sustainable, lasting impact, quite often they've got to shape and influence the ecosystems in which they operate. They've got to affect the behavior of other players in those ecosystems. They may have to change the rules by which those ecosystems operate. They may have to create new structures, new cultures. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to toss up a framework here that Paul Bloom and I put together. It comes out of an article that was in the Stanford Social Innovation Review a couple years back. Now if I go forward, here it is. I'm just going to quickly talk through this, and we'll use it to illustrate as we're talking. And I think it'll come to life more as we bring it to life, talking about Mozilla. But basically it says there are players in your ecosystem and there are conditions, just like a normal biological ecosystem. In a biological ecosystem, you've got other plant species, animal species, those are the players. You've got conditions, like the soil conditions, the weather conditions. You've got the temperature, you've got the different types of how much water there is available, et cetera. So, but in terms of the players, we group them into different categories. Resource providers and the intermediaries that might direct those resources to you, your organization, to other organizations that might be complementary or allies for you, to competitors that may be competing for the resources. They may also be competing to play the same kind of role that you're playing in this ecosystem. The other players include potential predators. Or opponents, or problem makers. You can think of any number of ways to think about this category, but these are folks who may undermine what you're trying to achieve. There may be people who come in behind you and undo what you're trying to do, or set up structures that create barriers for you to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And so you need to be aware of those folks too. That's the red arrow, meaning it sort of subtracts from social impact if they're being effective. Here, you've got your direct beneficiaries and potential customers here, which is your path to social impact. And they're potentially affected bystanders. They're folks in the ecosystem that you might overlook, but who are affected by the things that you do in your activities. And they may be affected positively or negatively, and sometimes they may get drawn into this play in some way. You can either turn them into allies. They may join forces with these folks if they're affected in a negative way, and try to block what you're doing politically and otherwise. But we've used these categories. We're not saying these are the only categories. This is a kind of framework that can easily evolve over time, but these are the players we think about. These are the environmental conditions we think about. Political and administrative structures, that means public policy, also means how public policy is implemented. So how do you register a business or a nonprofit in a certain place? What are the regulatory rules and structures? So if you're going to start charging interest as Kiva, what's that going to do? How's that going to change the way you operate? So right now, one of the barriers Kiva has to adopting that kind of business model is a regulatory barrier. It's a policy barrier, and it's a barrier that will change from country to country. So it's a US barrier. It's a barrier that want to operate in the UK or through the UK. It's a barrier in developing countries that have their own regulations about this. So it's administrative and policy structures. It's the economics and the markets that you're operating in. So understanding economic trends, the economic conditions, and the markets you're operating in, and those can vary, obviously, from one country to another. Those conditions can certainly affect your ability to tap into resources, the availability of those resources, the way you negotiate with them. Geography and infrastructure can vary, again, widely from one market setting to another. And again, having worked, pardon me, I took a couple years off to do some rural economic development in eastern Kentucky, and I can tell you that work is very different from urban economic development. And so just simple geography can make a huge difference. Winding your way through the hills of eastern Kentucky behind a coal truck, you'll get a good sense of just how hard it is, even simply for people to get anywhere. We were doing entrepreneurial development for local entrepreneurs there to even get to the community college to take a course on cash flow, for instance, is difficult. It's hard. Many of them are just not going to do it. It's a long drive for many of them. And so as you start to think about how do we help those entrepreneurs, you've got to take into account things like geography, local infrastructure, is it any good, what's there? And this could be physical infrastructure, it can be electronic or virtual infrastructure. Culture, demography, social trends also are conditions in which you're operating. So this is the broad framework that we use. I'm going to talk about it just briefly, and we're going to hand it over to Mark. Let me give just a couple examples, and I'll try to go through these briefly. The example we use in the article is self-help. This is an organization headquartered in Durham, North Carolina. There is a self-help affiliate here in California that's doing some very innovative work. But one of the things that self-help did to try to make sound mortgages available for low-income customers. These are not the mortgages that are going to explode on them in 3 years when the rates go up, but these are actually well underwritten mortgages that will allow low-income homeowners to ideally repay their loans and own their houses. And this was before the market fell apart. They did a couple things. One, they went after the predators who they thought were doing predatory lending practices. Those lending practices contributed to the mortgage crisis that we had. They set up a Center for Responsible Lending. That Center for Responsible Lending tracked those practices, brought them to the attention of policymakers, and in some states got some laws enacted. Unfortunately, many of those laws were too late to have stopped the crisis. But they weren't too late to have protected at least some families. But Center for Responsible Lending, which is in DC, has worked with many states to try to set up new laws and to track different questionable lending practices. And that was a way to affect the ecosystem in which self-help was operating to make those loans available. They also created a new secondary market, working with Fannie Mae and the Ford Foundation to create a secondary market for these particular sound low-income borrowers. But it got mixed up with a secondary market for highly questionable loans. Unfortunately, they had their own market, but there was also this huge market for loans that were not well underwritten at the same time. But again, it was their strategy for affecting the ecosystem in which they're operating in to free up capital to make new loans. They originated, or through that, originated some over $4 billion worth of secondary securities of soundly underwritten low-income mortgages. Another example of influencing the ecosystem was the Harvard Alcohol Project. Came up with the idea of designated driver, which is the idea of reducing drunk driving, not reducing drinking. So you've got to be careful about this. Having a designated driver does not reduce drinking. So it's not a strategy for getting people off of alcohol. It's simply a strategy for getting them home from the bar safely. So people often push back on this. This is because it is not addressing this particular problem. It's simply getting people home and reducing, ideally, the number of deaths on the highway as a result. They did partner with MAD to make this concept popular, but they also very cleverly partnered with TV producers. So on shows, those of you old enough to remember Cheers, it was a popular show at the time, got producers of that show and other shows to feature designated drivers. And this became a part of the culture to have a designated driver. So they changed the culture, another way to change an ecosystem. Finally, I'll mention City Year. which was one of the pioneers in national service. They created a strong national service program in Boston. Of course, they have one in San Jose. Out here, which is one of the affiliates. And no, sorry for that. I'm getting a little dry late in the day. The one in Boston served as a kind of action tank to test out their concept for national service. It also, they used that as a platform for pushing legislation, helping to develop the early AmeriCorps legislation, and most recently the Kennedy Serve America Act, which is expanding AmeriCorps to 225,000 members. So city years influenced the ecosystem through policy. Just finally, a couple comments on this. Ecosystem thinking puts your venture in a broader perspective. And we really strongly suggest to social entrepreneurs that they do that. It's so easy to get focused on the day-to-day. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Let's get it done. Let's get eyeglasses on people. Let's get our fair trade brand in the stores. This just sort of forces you to step back and say, okay, overall, what's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Who else do we need to get involved to accomplish it? What other levers do we have to achieve that impact? In the end, it's all about let's achieve some kind of disproportionate impact relative to our size and our influence. Let's find levers to do that. And what are the levers in the ecosystem for achieving that? All right. Sorry, that's the end of mine. Mark? I think so. Sorry. Yeah. I have a bottle. Yeah. I will. Yeah.
So really, what I want to actually get Greg to do in about 10 minutes is sort of take this diagram and throw it against Mozilla. So we're going to do a little sort of Oprah-style talk show where he does that. I want to set him up a little bit and set you guys all a little bit. With the story of Mozilla and the story of Firefox just as fodder for this, and through an ecosystem lens. And so I want to talk about what we care about as an organization, which is the open web. And I want to talk about that in the context of Firefox, although it's not the only thing we do. Now, will this work? No, I'm going to stand over here. Battery design. And I guess, I'll talk about what we think of as Firefox has been before, which is to move and shape markets, the market which is the web as a whole, which, both essentially it has to be an ecosystem play, and I think even if we wouldn't have called it that, is exactly how it works. There's a lot of different players and pieces in the picture, and most importantly, there's always been intent of using all of those players to have that leverage impact way beyond our size. So I guess, how many people here use Firefox? So when you're doing Firefox, how many people think they're saving the internet? Right? So the thing is, most people don't think about the fact that we exist for something bigger than to make this piece of open source software. If you go back to our California incorporation papers in 2003, those are the exact words it says in the mission section. And so why we make Firefox is in pursuit of that mission. And what I want to do is, as a part of unpacking the ecosystem idea, talk a little bit about sort of our theory of change. Again, we probably use those fancy academic words ourselves in terms of how we're trying to guard the open nature of the internet with Firefox. And also, I'll preview a little bit what we think are some of the challenges ahead for the internet. And of course, it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. We see the internet as a huge and essential public resource for humanity, right? So why you want to guard its open nature is the wealth, the creativity, the social good that has come from the internet is because it's an open system that people can innovate on top of it, right? So that's what we're guarding, is this common asset that's open for humanity to work on. And when you say, well, how do you guard that? Well, one specific goal, there's probably a lot of other ones, is this. Does anybody know what this is? So this is the declaration at the beginning of a web page. You wouldn't see it. It says this is an HTML page. And one of our goals when we set out with Firefox was to make sure that you saw a lot more of these at the top of web pages, or more importantly, that things on the web were built with standards. And so that openness, that raw material, which has created so much wealth and innovation, is because there's basically a set of Lego blocks that make up the internet that we can all use without asking anybody else's permission. And we were at a point where those Lego blocks were in danger. And so, goal, go and fight for the Lego blocks. And, that's a very worthy social cause, boring for all of you. But if you think about it in your own context, this is probably something familiar. How many people see this from time to time? Not that many. People all work in universities where they force you to use Thunderbird or something. So what's interesting about this compared to where we were when we started with Firefox is this is a productivity app on the web, and it's made out of open standards. It's made out of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's because those standards are ubiquitous across all of the ways that we see the web now, that we've got all of these things. And we've got Google Docs, we've got all of the things that you use, right? We're made up of that Lego. That Lego is very rich and healthy right now. That's what makes the internet so groovy. But keeping that Lego healthy is about the ecosystem being built around strengthening that open Lego system. And if we go back to 2003, when Mozilla Foundation started, and around the time that Firefox was starting to become the way we were working on the browser, it wasn't a healthy ecosystem. And so July 28, 2003, Microsoft Internet Explorer 6 through 5, 97 plus 1.49 plus 5. You get the idea that there was one way to see the internet. And that one way to see the internet was not one that was being designed or was supportive to that open set of Legos, to that open standard-based vision of the web. And so this is actually a less than a year old, this picture, but it represents something that probably a lot of us saw 5 or 6 years ago. Just blow up the people remember, just put your hand, seeing boxes like this ever before? These people weren't, you're either tired or your hands and weren't paying attention at the time. But it was the case that people were designing web pages just for Internet Explorer, because why not, right? That was 98% of how people were seeing the internet. And what that meant was a lot of the open standards, a lot of the raw material of innovation that makes the internet and the web what it is today, what it was always intended to be by the people who invented it, was eroding. And it was eroding because one company got to decide how you made web pages. And it used lots of the pieces of HTML, but it was also going off in other directions. And at the same time, this is also pulled out from 2003, you started to see nicer web pages. Like if you remember, web pages used to be a little bit less magical, that you'd have to kind of reload all the time, whatever. You started to see these web pages with menus popped up and stuff the way they do now. And this is one of those from 2003. But if you went and you did view source, which people may not know what you can do here, but on any web page you go view source and see how it's made, which of course is one of the reasons that innovation has moved so fast on the web, is because the source code of any web page is available to anyone. So we go and we hit view source on this page. Probably doesn't mean anything to many people here, but basically the only piece of content in there is this line, which ends with the .swf, which is, it's a flash file. So none of that page is really made with that open set of Lego blocks. There was an idea in the early part of around 2003, in order to make things interactive, in order to get to things like we have now with Gmail or YouTube, the only way to do it would be to close it inside of this box. There wasn't a set of open Lego blocks upon which the internet now exists and thrives. So that's what we were fighting against. That was what Firefox was there to address, as well as the fact that everybody was looking at the internet through a lens that didn't support this vision. So how do we go at that? Here is a very funny story. A friend of mine who's the president of Mozilla Europe used to work at Netscape. At a certain point, AOL shuts down Netscape, and all these people, some of them had worked on the Mozilla project as volunteers. It was a community project outside of AOL, outside of Netscape, before the foundation had formed. He was in sort of outplacement training, right? Like he didn't have a job, they're trying to help him find a job. And everybody was also in outplacement training. It's kind of like an AA meeting, and they're like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Oh, well, I'm going to really retrain and become a cook. Or, I really got to get my skills to become an accountant. He comes to him and he says, I'm going to help form a nonprofit with 10 other people, and we're going to take on Microsoft. And everybody kind of looked at him and said, come on. But that's exactly what we did. That's who we are. And from those 10 people, of which he was one, that's a part of who we are now. That's this summer at Whistler, BC, including these people who actually are real people who work in Mozilla inside these boxes. That's 600 people, 300 community volunteers, and the 300 people who are paid to work for Mozilla, all of whom are in some way involved in making Firefox and Thunderbird. And what's more important is there's 300 volunteers there, but there's another about 20,000 people who in some voluntary capacity still make Firefox. And so the first part of the ecosystem that we went after was getting people involved in this grand effort of bringing back the web. Right? So that's a very important social cause for the people who understood it, and a pretty massive number of people stepped to the plate to come and help do it, right? But who else we also got to participate in? This is an interesting part of the sort of ecosystem part that may not be obvious to you. It starts to speak to Greg's model, Paul's model, which is we also got web developers involved in participating. And so one of the really key things in terms of the impact we wanted, bringing back to life, preserving the Lego blocks, is that web developers had to start building web pages differently. They had to start building web pages that re-embrace standards, and they didn't have that message where it said this only works in Internet Explorer. They needed to test it in Firefox, they needed to write to more standards-based codes, all those kind of things. So that's a big thing in terms of shifting the ecosystem. Now the good news is Internet Explorer was crappy for them. They hated to develop in it. And also at the time, by bringing back and moving the browsers back towards standards and JavaScript getting better, and all of those CSS emerging and getting better, what happened is they could start building these Ajaxy web apps, or these kind of flashy web apps that we're used to today, which are just made up of the basic Lego blocks of the internet. But what we had to do, and they came with us and they're a part of that, was get web developers also excited about building the internet in a different way and bringing back to standards. So that's the other thing we did. We did it partly by giving them better tools, and partly by giving them documentation, and partly by running events for them, and partly because they just wanted to seem cool and not Microsoft and stuff like that, right? But it shifted the web. And then there's at least one other group of people worth mentioning, and there are more in this ecosystem, but they're the people who are here. Does anybody know what that is? If not, people who work for Mozilla aren't allowed to answer. Any guesses? So that's a New York Times ad that came out in the Sunday New York Times when Firefox 1 was launched. And these are the names of everybody who gave $10 or more to place that ad. So people cared enough about getting this out that $200,000 was raised to buy that ad when Firefox came out, right? So the people who cared about what the web would become, or were excited by Firefox or whatever, were also critical. And I think that's really, if you want to go to the kind of the business story side of it, absolutely critical. Probably one of the most important elements. Not because they put this in here, but because on almost no marketing budget, we went from 0 to 23% market share to 400 million users because people went and installed it on each other's computers, right? So how many people have installed Firefox on somebody else's computer? So you guys are a part of that. And how many people had somebody install it for you? Right? So you're the beneficiaries of that. Right? So that's a really critical part of this story that almost no other company can, well, we're not a company, but nobody else can say that's how they do it, right? That's really critical part of the ecosystem play and participation. And so this is now drastically out of date, as will be the other statistical graph I show you. But this shows you the kind of the general breakdown of what that ecosystem is, or at least the direct ecosystem. So I think what you'll hopefully pull out, Greg, is a little bit of the indirect ecosystem. But what it has here is 400 core contributors, people who write Firefox, and it's bigger than that now. 2,000 localizers and add-on developers. And so those are, Firefox comes out in over 70 languages on the day of release, all made by volunteers, right? So then the New York Times donors, people who submit bugs, people who beta alpha test, 3 million people who beta test, 8 million people who did a Guinness Book of World Records, download anything, and at this point it's got 400 million users. So those people are all pitching in. Those people are all a part of us trying to win that dog type battle and try to keep the Lego that the internet is built on alive and healthy. And here's just a bit of the story, which if we did get to the financial stuff, I think we'll get to that, is kind of interesting. So here's market share growth. Again, it's code out of date, but this goes to 2007, and we're at 400 million users, but the curve just keeps going up from there. And basically what happened is we were a little dog in open source project, and I wasn't involved in any of this period. And then when we actually got to, and didn't have much market share, and then we get to Firefox, and what happens is we're totally surprised that there's 10 million downloads in the first 30 days, and it just goes up like this. Like nobody thought that would happen. What's even more interesting than the market share part is what's happened in the ecosystem. So what's happening in the ecosystems, we've gone from this in 2003 to this in 2008 to this in 2010. And what's interesting about where we are in 2010 is, you know, we've got some other problems related to this, but we've got the world we want. In that the ecosystem or the web is now fragmented in terms of the choices that users have. And yes, there are differences of opinion on a lot of technical details that matter, but the main browsers that aren't Internet Explorer, and now with IE9 even Internet Explorer, are basically pushing not only that basic standard-based idea of what the web is, what that Lego toolkit should be, but the cutting edge of it. And so you've now got all these people driving forward, now they do some other nasty things that we don't love, driving forward with an idea of the web that is based on this open set of Lego blocks. And if you're more business-minded, that's what the market share looks like in the pie chart, although I think it's less sexy than the logos. But you get the point, is that, you know, we've gone from monopoly to diversity, and not only diversity that's marginal, I mean, it's quite healthy beyond even just Firefox. So that is awesome for this open Lego block world, right? It's very good. It is the part of the world we wanted to see, in many ways we really want to see. And it's been awesome. You just think of the last 3 years of the web, you think about things like Kiva, for creativity, for innovation, for moving markets. And that's exactly what we did, right? Here's a small nonprofit that went from the internet and how it's built being closed down as a market to broad market behavior being very different in terms of how we make the internet and how we consume it. So that's what we were doing. And of course, that's made a much healthier ecosystem, which of course is not just Firefox or browsers, but is all of the things that benefit from the internet remaining an open system that all of us use every day. I'm sure those are all very familiar logos to you. So, guard the open nature of the internet. We got some good things. We didn't do them alone. Greg can interview me and ask me more about them. I wasn't around for all of it. Before I do that, I just want to leave you with, is it over? Or is the fact that we got some of the world we wanted to live in enough, and now we can shut things down and go home or have a party? And the unfortunate thing is, no, we still need to do that. And there's a bunch of places that things are quite worrisome or concerning, where we still need to push towards that mission in other domains. And three that are just worth highlighting are mobile and the mobile internet, your and my identity on the internet, who we are, our social graph, our friends, and also the web that we build. That same question of the web developers building out the Lego blocks is still in question right now, because there are other changes that are pushing developers away from the open kind of Lego block version of the internet. And so as we move forward, we're trying to use the assets we have and use that same strategy for participation ecosystem to shift mobile, so mobile Firefox, as well as an open web app store we announced this week, being about trying to disrupt and take apart the kind of iPhone and other kind of closed app store environment, which is really a threat to the internet itself. Identity in labs, working to do things that will give you more control over your social graph, your data, and those kind of things. And it's something that I'm driving called Drumbeat. We're trying to go to industries that build big parts of the web, education, media, film, and work with the people who are innovators in those spaces to get them thinking about what technologies the web should be made up of in the future. So that's probably longer than I said it would be, but hopefully it sets up for a good conversation.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Mark.
And actually, should we go back to your diagram?
Yeah, sure. Let's put that up. And you did say Oprah talk show, not cough show, right? Yeah. So I've got to stifle the coughing. even though you weren't here at the beginning, we can even just kind of roll the tape back conceptually to talk a little bit about how this played out when Mozilla was started and when Mozilla decided to roll out Firefox as well to change the ecosystem here in terms of the internet. How much did it matter that Microsoft had been under pressure legally and publicly about Internet Explorer and about the integration of Internet Explorer in Windows? Did that help create an opportunity or not? Did that make any difference?
Yeah, I don't know. Because I wasn't here, I can't say exactly this, exactly that. My guess as an observer is probably as good as yours, that certainly the public pressure put on the radar, that this is something to care about, right? So to the fact that nobody put up their hand saying I use Firefox because I'm saving the web, you might have actually at that moment in time with that public pressure had more people say, well, I'm a little bit worried about that monopoly.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how many of you followed that, but certainly there was a period of time in which Microsoft was sued because they were requiring everybody to buy Internet Explorer as part of Windows, and there was an issue of whether that ought to be separated out, and people ought to be able to choose their browser independently, and it probably also pushed Microsoft back a bit off of putting pressure on developers to be exclusive, I would think, for Internet Explorer. But as you
they also got a bit lazy.
Yeah.
Right? You have a monopoly like that. You don't push developers because you got the platform, right? Why keep innovating?
Yeah. So why do you think? I mean, clearly, your success was driven in part by so many people here adopting Firefox. Why do you think that happened? I mean, since so many, we didn't get all these hands going up on doing it to fight Microsoft or to free up the web. Why? I mean, everybody's got a browser.
Yeah. So I think there's a bunch of reasons that are pretty easy to see, and they range from the fact that like a lot of the people who did install Microsoft, who installed Firefox, on other people's home computers or office computers, did feel like they were doing some kind of rebel thing, right? So I think there was an early adopter. I see some heads nodding.
Okay.
And people tell me that when we talk about sort of how we actually need to reshape our brand, and we're thinking about a lot of that stuff now, is, I got on the train because I felt I was a part of the Rebel Alliance, right? So I think there was a part of that, and those people brought other people on. And then, this is a really critical thing that I think a lot of most successful social enterprises, people like Fair Trade, that are in the consumer space, realize you then need to, for that next group, deliver on the promise of the brand, right? So the Rebel Alliance is nice for the people who are happy to have warts on their organic food, but then it actually has to taste better, right, for the next percentage of the market. And so Firefox was fast. Firefox had a pop-up blocker in it, and I mean, how many people remember pop-ups, right?
Oh.
And how many people are plagued by them constantly today, right? So there were some pretty basic product things that the product did better, right? It was faster, it was simpler, and it got rid of pop-ups, and it was safer. I mean, also, who remembers browser-based viruses, right? I mean, that was it's hard to remember back because we've shifted that so much.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you did. And in part, we're going to talk about ecosystems, but also there are a lot of themes that come up in the Mozilla story that pick up on issues that we discussed this morning. So as you talk about that, here you've got this superior product. Why do it as a nonprofit?
Well, I mean, I guess the two good reasons: the practical one and the I think essential visionary one. The essential visionary one is the internet is a critical public resource for humanity. Like it's not to be understated. And to have an organization that is trying to shape the market and shape sort of the behavior of the people who influence what the web is, who, for the next 25 or 50 or 100 years, hold themselves accountable not to profit, but to that goal, I think is a good one, right? So right now, nobody's able to sell Firefox to somebody who would come and buy it, and it's worth a lot of money, right? If we wanted to divest of it. And we wouldn't. And the reason is we want there to be an organization and a group of people who stand up for this. And we want that to be something that never can be liquidated and is there past the lifespans of all the people who founded it. So I mean, I think I was talking to some other folks, a person from the Nature Conservancy, about this also then in relationship to the, why not make Fair Trade USA a for-profit? Like for me, same answer for them, right? You want that brand and that standard to be incorruptible and there as a public asset for a really long time. So that's the main reason. And I think we stand by that, and it's not going to change. There also was a very silly and practical reason. Well, maybe not silly, very practical reason. We didn't think there was any way to make any money off it, right? So Mozilla was financed by people who donated, just like people who donated to the New York Times ad, and by a couple of medium-sized grants in the beginning, and a bunch of smallish major donors, right? So the idea is this is going to be a 10-person nonprofit with a lot of volunteers begging for donations, right? Or maybe begging is the wrong word. So that was the structure we thought we had to have. Now, turns out there are other ways we're able to generate revenue from search and other things. Turns out that way more people use Firefox than we thought, and so that revenue opportunity that we kind of stumbled across in search went through the roof much faster than we did, and we haven't had to have donations as a core part of what we're doing. And we have them also as something we're using for expanding into new fields, but I think in the end, the stewardship piece is the reason to remain a nonprofit, and it's pretty core to who we are.
Yeah. So what is your overall business model now then in terms of mix of earned income and donations?
So I think the mix of earned incomes and donations right now is probably 95% earned income and with a big surplus on operating, right? And we got, I think, $100 million in the bank or something like that. And so, by far it's earned income. It's not to say that it'll always stay that way. And I think we actually both, both from a diversity perspective, actually also from a connectedness perspective, that Pramel talked about, are going to be putting more emphasis on membership and donations over the next few years, and also more emphasis on partnerships with other people who can bring significant philanthropic resources and pool them with us. Because our interest is both having people have a buy-in, through donating or other kinds of participation to this idea of where the web goes, and we want to influence how philanthropic money thinks about the web and that aspect of, especially if they're in education, if they're in media, getting them thinking about what does the web mean for the future of the domains where they're trying to work.
So in order to achieve this impact, did you form any specific alliances or coalitions, or has this all been just largely Mozilla and then developers just kind of came along on their own, or how did you do this?
So I guess it's all alliances and it's all participation, right? It's a huge ragged artillery of whatever that is, 400 million people or 20.
Well, coming along, but deliberately. So were there intentional strategic alliances, people you sought out, organizations you sought out?
People in that regard, yes, right? So really creating people who were working on core aspects of the technology. And then, I don't really want to say this, especially on videotape.
Okay.
But I think a lot of the things that people would think of as strategic alliances traditionally in nonprofits, there was a lot of that, like we need this organization, we need this, we need that. Didn't end up having as much impact as saying we need that person, we need that community, we need the people in that country to help translate it. So think of what the stuff that as an internet era corollary to community organizing was much more important in terms of bringing energy in than kind of traditional organizational partnering. But there are key things. Like it's very arcane stuff, but like some of the stuff underneath that runs critical parts of internet security, we did with other people like IBM, right? And so there were a lot of early alliances that still there are pieces of floating around that are, I guess, what you might think of as traditional open source resourcing, in the sense that IBM will do this part, and Mozilla will do this part, or somebody else will do that part, right? But that's not been as big a part of it.
Interesting. Okay, and who, other than would you put Microsoft down in this box, or do you think are they?
Yeah, I think so they certainly were. I guess you can judge for yourself whether they're relevant now.
Yes.
Seriously, in terms of what we think about, they're a relevant company. In terms of shaping the destiny of the web, Apple and Google and Facebook and maybe even Adobe have as much or more influence than Microsoft does on where the web can
So,
go, right?
yeah,
So
who-
in various tiers, all of those other players who have influence on the web definitely can either be here or here, right? Or I don't know where your allies are.
Allies are right behind you.
Right, so they,
Yeah.
they can be either here or here. And so, when Apple goes and doesn't put Flash on the iPad and on the iPad and on the iPhone, so you
Yes.
have to use HTML5 video.
Yes.
That's awesome for the web ecosystem, right? So they're here, right? They just did in a one fell swoop something to take away this closed box of video that's inside of Flash and Adobe that's really good for everybody, and it helps a bunch of things we're trying to do and others are trying to do in terms of that open set of Lego blocks. On the other hand, the App Store model and the kind of closed proprietary platforms of apps on the iPhone and iPad are disastrous for the internet, and certainly something that we want to see replaced by being able to use the web on any device and have an app that runs on any device. Because we don't want to go back to the world where sorry, I have a PC, you have a Mac, we can't use the same accounting software. I have to buy a Mac because I got Pork Express. That's 1985. We don't want to go back to that world. Partly because it sucks, but it's also bad for the internet. So in that case, they're over there.
Yeah, and that's this is important because as we've thought about examples and played out how you do this analysis with specific organizations, quite often you'll see one organization that can fit into multiple boxes on here. And in this case, you've got Apple in two different places. They're an ally in some ways, and they could end up in either place, and they could be driven to either place depending on what happens with their strategy or how they interact with you and with others who are playing in this space. I mean, if Adobe had come to them and worked out a deal, then they end up shifting.
And so it's a combination of sort of like vision and also just behavior in the marketplace. Because of course we're not coordinating on whether they're in that box or not, right? They're making their own decisions. And
yes.
That's what an ecosystem is, right? That animal eats that thing and then I starve or whatever.
Yeah,
right? So
that's right.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah, there is certainly an amount of risk. Is there anybody you're particularly worried about when you start thinking about the future and some of the risks to the internet here?
So I think that there's behaviors we're
Okay.
worried about, or particular things. I mean, the proprietary single platform mobile apps, that we're worried about that, right?
Yeah.
The siloization of your identity in one place, or whether that's Facebook, or whether that's Twitter, or whether that's Gmail, so that then what happens is we start layering other kinds of data on top of those places, and we don't have control over our own data. Absolutely something we're particularly worried about.
Yes.
Industries like education that I worry about a lot, being very slow moving and buying into closed proprietary systems, so even if the market goes in the right direction, big chunks of society go in the wrong direction. I'm worried about those things too. So, I don't think that there's any big. The good news is we're not in a situation where the whole IT landscape has got a single monopoly controlling it anymore, right? So there are behaviors by particular players in the marketplace which we think are, not where the web should go or are particularly worrying. But you're not in a situation where somebody in a completely vertically integrated way controls the whole thing. So that's actually, even though many worrying things, probably not a bad place to be.
Well, let's open it up. So we should make this a conversation with the whole group. So other questions for Mark? Yeah, Kate.
I have a question. In the early days of the internet, there would be standards groups and member organizations, and they were international in scope, and they were largely kind of the rocket scientists of that world. So you mentioned specific competitors, but is there a role in this ecosystem still for these global or international?
Yeah, standards like W3C and
I'm not sure. Are they standards?
They're standards bodies. Yeah,
Standards bodies.
So
So are they still a relevant part of the ecosystem?
In particular, the World Wide Web Consortium, which controls the HTML spec, very, very relevant. Also doesn't move at the same speed as the market. And so one of the things that's really interesting, I'm not the expert in this, I kind of know the experts around here that watch, but you'll see it in terms of things like video that have come out and become a part of the web in the last year. What's kind of happening is the standards bodies are sort of defining the terrain, but not necessarily finalizing the standards. And then you're doing basically what we've actually done all along, when you're now seeing Google and Apple, not really so much Microsoft do as well, is you're then proving that those draft specifications work, even before they're finalized in the market. And what that means is, you know, there's some unevenness between how those standards are implemented, and then the standard body has to kind of come back and consolidate it. So the difference is they're still important. I think their role is changing in that it's not so much as they get to the end of a prescriptive process and then the market just picks it up. There's now an interplay between the market and the standard body.
But it sounds like, so they are a critical part of the ecosystem.
Sure.
Fair to say in terms of the culture of openness and.
Yep. And I think also in terms of that broader like idea of the internet as a public asset, right? So for us, if that's the bottom line, right, that the internet remains a public asset in the sense that it's Lego blocks that anyone can build on, they're a critical part of that because they own the specifications, they own the Lego blocks.
Can I just follow up on that? It sounds like they are some of your best allies then, in some ways.
Yeah, not necessarily the easiest to work with, but
Right.
most important.
And then you are kind of this outlier ally for them, right? Because you're producing new products and kind of proving, or, are there
Yeah.
other strategies that you are doing, besides product disruption to show openness? I mean,
In terms of for them or just in general?
In general.
So in general, product disruption is where we've been successful. And so then in mobile and then hopefully in identity, that's what we do as well. This sort of drumbeat piece I talked about briefly that I'm running is about a broader footprint that kind of goes beyond product and is much more about bringing in the people who will shape what the web needs in different parts of the world and basically nurturing them to kind of, I guess, be ambassadors of our agenda. And so, for example, under that drumbeat banner, we've created this open video lab for filmmakers who are trying to do interactive cinema to help them take the sort of cutting edge of these Lego building blocks and make sure that what they're experimenting with in interactive cinema is, you know, both tapping into the most cutting edge stuff we have, but also built on those open principles, right? We're doing stuff like that in education. We'll probably do stuff like that next year in journalism. So that's becoming our second tier, which is the what I call shaping the web we weave, or shaping these industries. And that's not product disruption. It's much more kind of trying to shape practice and behavior.
but the idea is that they would then be product disruptors.
Yeah.
In a sense, because there has to be a critical mass of people following those principles for it to become an overall
Yeah,
standard.
it's a sort of. I mean, it's not the same as product disruption in that it doesn't kind of come in and
Right.
like that.
Right.
It's a much
It's
kind
slower,
of
dispersed.
slower thing. Like, you know, we're kind of turning the water on slowly. It's going to rise. Now, you hopefully will have things like, say, somebody from that lab produces something that, you know, wins an Academy Award or wins a Sundance that will just, you know, open people's minds up. And we're certainly thinking about those things. But it's not so much the product itself as much as how it influences thinking. So it's a much more traditional nonprofit strategy in that way. It's influencing behavior patterns, influencing kind of professional practices, all of that kind of stuff. And we don't know if that'll work or not.
Okay, we can go here. Yeah, there's one over there too, but let's yeah, okay.
So
Yeah,
here's
we
my
got
question. Are
some other ones.
can you tell if you're primarily a northern hemisphere urban ecosystem, or are you also equally a southern hemisphere rural ecosystem too? Because I think I mentioned to you that I've been in some you know, cooperative computer labs, you know, way out in the middle of nowhere in Brazil, but I didn't happen to notice, you know, what they were using for their browser.
So I mean, I think there's a couple of questions to that. One is, where are we centered in terms of like who's driving the ecosystem? And it's clearly mostly northern and urban, and certainly primarily urban. You know, the fact that you get Firefox out in 70 languages on the day of release also means we've got a lot of global reach, right?
Sure.
And so we're certainly not just a North American organization, and we're not just northern in terms of, you know, there's an awesome community in Brazil or in other places like that that translate Firefox. But in terms of the impact and like who uses it, I think we don't really know. Like to your very specific question, like are they using Internet Explorer in kind of rural Brazil or not? Anecdotally, there's some things we can know in terms of, you know, people who run cyber cafes, in particular ones that are, like in Brazil, unbelievably hard to run a cyber cafe. A lot of those people share the same kind of spirit we have. You see them picking up Firefox as a part of their sort of rebel attitude. Or Indonesia, where people are almost only accessing Firefox through, or the internet through cyber cafes, is 60% Firefox market share, or 50% Firefox market share. So, I mean, you have things that kind of say that maybe we have a better reach out in those contexts, but it's pretty hard to know.
Okay, let's go back here.
Deborah Dunn from
Hey, Deborah.
I've had a chance to work in Mozilla a lot, actually, which has been very fun.
Awesome,
And
thank you.
I think it's pretty clear that your structure and your whole ecosystem are quite unique in the mainstream business world. So one of my questions related to leadership.
To which?
Leadership. Mitchell and John Lilly, I also think are pretty unique.
Yep.
Relative to other corporate leaders.
Yep.
Now you're going through some leadership transition.
Yep.
I'm interested in your perspective of how difficult it is, and maybe what some of the key leadership traits are that allow for success in operating this kind of environment as a mainstream business player.
Yep.
Which I think you guys clearly are.
Yeah, and I think we're unique-ish. I mean, there's a couple of other outliers like us, and it's interesting to watch them go through their leadership changes. So Wikipedia is as mainstream, I think, in the consumer market for the internet as we are, in different but similar things. And so I actually think for people to study this stuff, like you, to look at kind of these very mass, Kiva's another one, sort of mass hybrid organizations that sit across the market and mission and use this kind of leverage you can get from the internet are interesting to look at. And I think in all of those, and those three organizations I mentioned have struggled with it in different ways, probably three things. I mean, it's hard because I can think of a long list. I see it as really critical, and I'm thinking about Mitchell a lot as I think about this. You know, certainly the deep, dogged, almost insane commitment to holding that space around this public asset, right? So everybody who's played a leadership role, especially since the beginning, could have made way more money, could have, you know, shaped the market in lots of really interesting ways, could have had lots of fun, right? And you know, if you spend time with the people who have been here longer than I have, especially Mitchell, there's a commitment to the, like, this is a important public asset we are here protecting and building, right? Like, and if you kind of imply the other way, you might get in a fight. And so, like, that holding of the space around the importance of this resource is really, I think, critical. And it has to be deep. And it's an interesting question over time, how, like, we're going through some board development stuff and whatever, how you can kind of deepen that and make it resilient, right? So, I mean, something that I'm thinking about a lot right now. And then, you know, I think the other thing, which often doesn't come with, you see it in social entrepreneurs, I think sometimes it's what you mean by social entrepreneurs, at least in the consumer space. Something that doesn't come with the kind of granola social public benefit stuff is an absolute commitment to stuff being awesome. And there's no sense that, you know, Firefox can go out there and we can say we're the nonprofit browser, you know, suck it up, it's slow, right? And so that combination alone, right, is the dogged protection of this public benefit and the commitment to, like, the table stakes is being awesome. And then after that, we save the world, right? So that is really important. And then I think the third thing, which is, you know, having leadership that can make that participation work, right? So that's a different kind of holding the space. And, you know, Mitchell in particular, but I think a lot of people who have played leadership roles in Mozilla, very strong individuals, and nobody would question that. At the same time, incredibly committed to stepping aside and letting other people lead in ways that sometimes are hard and painful to watch. Like that, in terms of saying, well, this person's got an idea, they've got an initiative. Don't stop the initiative, right? Don't stop energy out of it. And that's always a hard balance because you also want to direct things in a certain way. So I think that ability to truly, not in any kind of shallow rhetorical sense, let other people lead. And also know when those other people who are leading are the ones that want to turn up the volume on and put more energy behind. That's, I think, a third critical element.
Great, thanks.
He's had his hand up for a long time.
grow by acquisition?
Pardon?
Can you grow by acquisition?
In terms of other companies? There's a couple, so I've only been here a little over 2 years. There's been a couple times where we've had to kind of talk about, get the opportunity to talk about that, saying, oh, there's something that looks like it shares our values, it needs some life support, or it might be right for acquisition, and we haven't done any of those things. And so it's not to say that we might never, but in those cases, it's pretty hard to see how, I guess 2 things, see the fit, right? So how's that thing going to organically become a part of this organism? And in particular, so yeah, I think that's the main thing, is like, if you brought it in, would it thrive in this cultural context? Would we add to it? And in the cases of, where we talked about that, the answer has been no. But the other is, it's an odd thing to think about. I mean, you don't want to write it off, but it's an odd thing to think about when how you build things is by everybody pitching in, right? To say, we're building this code base, we're building these new things. Yeah, we've got paid employees, but there's also a lot of volunteers out there building it. To then say we're going to go and pay X amount of money for this thing and bring it in. Again, it's not to write it off, but the few times we've looked at it, it's felt odd. So I don't know. I think it's a case by case thing. I wouldn't rule it out, but it hasn't seemed like the right thing to do. And certainly, I can't imagine us growing by acquisition in the core markets, like in the browser market, for example, right? If you look around, those are not companies we can acquire. But also, it points to the fact that pure market share isn't our goal. So, as long as we have enough market share that we can shape the overall discussion about what the web is, we're fine. So that kind of growth also, it's important to say, isn't the growth we would go after through acquisition, just because it's not the main motivator.
Yeah, so let's go over here.
I have a question about the organization structure and communication from, I guess, inception. So from when you started with these 10 people to the launch of 1.0 to what you are today, how was that facilitated? How did people meet? If everybody's all over the place, if you're dealing with half volunteers, half paid, how did you?
So you're talking about
manage
the
that?
operational side
Yeah.
of participation and collaboration?
And keeping people engaged and just sort of that.
So it's hard, and I would say, again, it's bad that I'm on camera, we actually become less good at it in some ways and are currently investing in getting better at it. So a bunch of ways which we're awesome at it as an organization that does distance and remote work. I think somebody who case studies that should come and look at us. We've gotten a lot better at it in the last year and a half. We use video a lot. This space kind of reflects the ways we want to work. So I think the day-to-day part of it, for an organization that has 150 people here, 150 people at other offices working from their home, in their bedroom, a lot of volunteers, I think we're pretty good. We can always get better. We still need to get better. I think the engagement part is hard, which is there is a real tension between building the professional horsepower that we need and bringing people in. Mary is back there, and she's one of the people who has to do it, right? Keep the community. She drives a lot of community marketing stuff. And it's hard to keep people engaged. And I think we are now having to go back and sort of say what's 2 or 3.0 version of engagement for us. Because the things that work to get that out in the New York Times, which I think in some ways we've kind of, maybe getting lazy is a bit too harsh on us, but sort of say, well, that's how we work, of course. Look, we're awesome at that. And yeah, we were, and we still do some of that stuff, but we're actually not awesome at that at the scale and the sophistication that we need to be now. So I think that's something that we struggle with. And so we actually need to take that sort of things that I just said about in terms of leadership, which is empowering people, letting them run, and we need to systematize them, and we need to figure out how they work at the level of thousands or maybe tens of thousands of local meetups a year, or people organizing new tasks and all those things. And we don't know how to do that yet. It's something that we're actively struggling with.
It's interesting to tie that into the business model questions we were talking about earlier, because part of the operating model here is to have a huge part of the workforce is unpaid. So you got half paid, half unpaid in terms of this, which is a...
Yeah, and it, so I guess it's...
But it requires a different kind of management.
Yeah. So
right?
There's no question it's a different kind of leadership, different kind of management.
Yeah.
And I think also part of that shift is thinking different ways about what that unpaid work is, or not even really thinking
Yeah.
of it that way. So one of the other things in terms of scaling, so part of that contribution is also about feeling connected, right?
Yes.
Back to what, I don't think that comes out enough in what we think about in the social entrepreneurship literature, and Vermal was right on about it. As part of that, yes, it's a volunteer labor force. Part of it's also about a group of people who feel connected to this thing, those are the people who evangelize it, those are the people who get out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're having to do is reconceptualize connection, because 20,000 volunteers may sound awesome, like they all fire all bug, or even 3 million beta testers may sound awesome, but really we need to be operating at the level of tens of millions of people who feel they have some stake in it, and have something to do. So we don't yet know, like, how do we engage those people, because it's not going to be actually building Firefox, right? What is the engagement for them? If we want to say then 50 years from now, what's this organization or this movement that keeps the web open? So that stuff's changing a lot.
Fascinating. Yes, back here.
Well, two questions. One, you also a nonprofit that doesn't have a capital issue. You got $100 million in the bank, so there's a very good
Yeah.
And so my question
Place to
about
be.
that is, when has being a nonprofit been a barrier for you? Because it certainly hasn't been a capital barrier. But on the second question, which I'm actually more interested in, is the engagement 2.0, 3.0 is probably going to be defined by those 400 million users. So how are you just listening to them, and what are the most exciting examples you're seeing out there that they're showing you how to be actively engaged in the open web movement if you're not building Firefox?
Yes, it's pretty early days, and I don't think we've seen any that will blow your mind. We've seen some, and so I would just say it's been 9 months since we've been doing this drumbeat thing, which is one of our kind of 2 ways that we'll invite people in to define that. And actually, so maybe if I don't think about the whole 400 million, I just think the people who come in the door so far, there are some good examples. They're not fully from the edge, but they're not from our core either. And so, for example, one of the cool things we're doing as we focus on education is one place where we can shape things and what the web is we've seen these people who are doing something called peer-to-peer university come in and say, well, we actually need a really good place to show off peer-to-peer university, which is basically study groups of people with open content, right? They're teaching each other, but they actually want to prove that they can assess and certify in that context and, disrupt universities. You'll still have a job. They think research universities should stay.
Oh, good. Thanks. I'm glad to hear that.
But in any case, they're looking for a real place where they can show this thing can work at scale. People can get jobs, right? And so, guess what? Guess what industry is like totally been failed by the education system? Web development. And so they've kind of come to us and said, well, let's build this school of webcraft where what we're going to do is we're going to try out assessment and certification in web development using peer teaching. So those are the kind of things that are starting to come into the edge, and some of the stuff with the filmmakers we're working with is kind of like that. But it's still baby stuff compared to where we want to go, and it's still not, the stuff we're getting is still stuff that we can imagine getting 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 people involved in building, and maybe having kind of reach and build in smaller contributions from 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 people. The ideas that come in that are going to allow a lot of people to participate, or the volume ideas that allow a lot of people to participate nodes, that stuff I think is really, I can't see it yet. But it's something we're actively thinking about how we do. So one of the things we'll do next year probably is open up something that looks a lot more like a standard membership program that then gives us more surface area and more people to have that conversation with. Because that's the other thing, we don't know how to talk to those 400 million people. We're actually not well set up for that at all. So the next step beyond this kind of drumbeat piece is to build a surface area where we can have those conversations and that they can have conversations with each other.
Paul?
Just a quick question. What do you do with all that money when the IRS comes and talks to you and you're labeled a foundation?
Right. So
how does that all work?
So we need to. We need to get into the boring how we're structured conversation, which is kind of boring to this group. Because I say it's boring because we've spent a lot of time saying, oh, we're a 501c3 with 2 for-profit subsidiaries. And turns out, and it goes to the question of Paul and the fair trade stuff, nobody gives a shit. Except for you guys on the IRS. And so, what we're actually trying to do is move our brand back from, we're Mozilla. Yes, we happen to have a bunch of operating organizations, but we're a nonprofit, and That's all that most people really care to know. And so we were actually doing a bunch of branding work to go back and really say, we're a nonprofit that stands up for the internet, and not we're these different configurations of legal organizations. But turns out we're a 501c3 with 2 primary for-profit subsidiaries, one that makes Thunderbird, one that makes Mail. It's an interesting story that we'll maybe never know the answer to. Why we did that was because we didn't know what the IRS would think about that revenue. Our very clear and studied opinion is that search needed to be in the Firefox browser for us to meet our mission. Like if you think back, there were no search bars in browsers in 2003, right? So we were saying we need a browser, we have to protect the internet, and one of the things that's going to get people to use it is search. And what's the first thing people want to do in the browser in 2003? Search, right? So that for us was like a mission-based decision. And you can go back and you can read bugs where people argued over what search engine to make as the default. And by the way, the search engine even predated any deal with Google by years, right? And so you saw people arguing what search engine, but then, and the engineers are in there, and people, everybody uses Google, let's put in Google, right? So there was no commercial intent, and then we just said, oh, we're leaving all this money on the table, maybe they would be willing to share some of it, and there was then a contract made up, and it's certainly beneficial to them. They probably do better off it by far than us, in terms of the huge amount of traffic they get. So our thought with the IRS was that is actually legitimate related business income. We'll never know necessarily what they'll think about that. But why we've got the structure we've got is we didn't want to find out.
And as a foundation, do you have to spend 5%?
No, because we're a public benefit. What we actually
not a
do
private
have to do
foundation.
is raise 33% or 10% as public support.
Yeah.
And so that actually, somebody asked it before and I didn't answer, what's been the problem of being a nonprofit? One of them is moving money around between our different structures in a period where we haven't been aggressively going out after public support money. So one of the things that we may be able to do in the future is if we do one of the things that I'm trying to get us to do, which is help other people who care about the web pool their resources and shape a little bit how philanthropic money gets used in this space, including by investing in some funds that we'll set up. That also helps us move money more fluidly across organizations because it brings additional public support in.
All right, excellent. I think we're probably about at the end of time. I see Aaron nodding at me back there. We've got this spread over there that looks like it's getting ready for the reception.
I just want to say
Paul's-
a few closing words.
Well, I'll do, if I could close the session, and then we'll let you close the whole thing, Paul. So we'll just take a minute to thank Mark for this. But I think Mozilla provides a very important and powerful example of how to change an ecosystem, in this case, largely through product disruption, but also by mobilizing a lot of interest in keeping the internet open and the web open in interesting ways. And I think it's a fascinating story. So Mark, thanks for sharing that with us. Powerful, and thanks for hosting us here too. This was just wonderful. Thanks.
I just want to say thanks to all of you guys, and thanks for you guys thinking of it. We wouldn't have thought to do it, and come back and do it again, because really, as I said in the beginning, quite genuinely, I don't get to talk to people like you very often, but we're in the same business, right? So it's actually very helpful to me in my joab, and for the other Mozilla people who are here in the room, just to engage in this conversation this way. So please do that.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Mark.
Let me echo the thanks to the Mozilla folks, Mary and Mark, for their hospitality party. Sarah too, okay.
Yes.
And then I especially want to thank Aaron Worsham, and Susie Camp, who I guess had to leave, right? Both of them did yeoman's work in creating this event. This was an attempt to interact more with the real world and practitioners, get out of our ivory tower, and I think, in my mind, we've accomplished a lot of that. And I don't see this as the end of this kind of relationship and this kind of discussion. I hope that we will stay in touch with a lot of you and continue this dialogue and discussion. Maybe even come back here someday and stage some other type of event. We are also considering having events like this in other parts of the country. This is a very positive experience from my point of view, and I think from our whole group's point of view. And we hope that you enjoy the hospitality for the rest of the afternoon. And definitely, as I said, stay in touch. Thank you.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.